Welcome to the Chosen One. Why do they call you crazy when you start winning alone? Why does your silence make them scream louder than your words ever did? And why? Why are the very people who mocked your solitude now checking your every move like you're carrying nuclear codes? Listen to me, warrior. Fear doesn't begin when the enemy sees your army. It begins the moment they realize one person alone dismantled everything they built. They thought you were isolated. They thought you were broken. They gathered their little covens, their gossip circles, their backstabbing committees, and they celebrated when you walked away. But here's what they didn't know. When God separates you from the crowd, He's not punishing you. He's positioning you. You see, they needed numbers. You only needed rank. They needed rituals and schemes and group chats full of poison. You only needed presence. And now they're watching in horror as everything they built with 100 hands is crumbling beneath the weight of your one-man army. Before we dive deeper into this battlefield of truth, I need you to do something for me. Smash that like button, hit subscribe, and drop 99 in the comments if you've ever stood alone and watched a crowd crumble. This isn't just a video, it's a spiritual warfare manual. And your engagement is your sword in this fight. And to every single soul who has supported this message through super thanks, your generosity echoes in eternity. You're not just giving, you're planting seeds of breakthrough for someone sitting in darkness right now, wondering if they'll ever escape the witch hunt. Whether you sow or not, your presence here matters. If this message is already stirring something deep in your spirit, go ahead and support however you feel led, because what I'm about to reveal will shatter every lie they told you about standing alone. By the end of this message, you'll understand why your silence became the deadliest weapon in heaven's arsenal, and why they're not just afraid of what you did ID. They're terrified of what you've become. The witch hunt is over. Chosen One. And guess who's still standing? How many times have you walked into a room and felt the shift? How many conversations died the second you appeared? And why does a group of grown adults suddenly act like they're planning the heist of the century whenever your name comes up? You felt it, didn't you? That invisible web of whispers, that coordinated campaign of character assassination, that perfectly timed symphony of sabotage. They called it coincidence. You called it what it was, warfare. Listen, Chosen One, what you experienced wasn't just office politics or family drama. You walked into the crosshairs of something ancient, something calculated, something that's been perfecting its craft since the Garden of Eden. You faced a gang of witches, not the Hollywood kind with pointy hats and broomsticks, the real kind, the kind that gathers in living rooms, conference calls, and group chats to cast spells with their tongues. They needed props, spreadsheets full of your mistakes, screenshots of your words taken out of context, voice recordings they'd replay to anyone who'd listen. They needed rituals, those weekly coffee meetings where your name was the main course, those prayer circles that were really curse circles in disguise. They needed numbers because their power was borrowed, shared, diluted among the desperate and the insecure. But you showed up with nothing but presence, and that terrified them. You see, they understood multiplication, but they never learned about rank. They thought 50 voices whispering lies could overpower one voice speaking truth. They believed their committee of cowards could outmaneuver heaven's general. They forgot that in God's army, one soldier aligned with divine purpose carries more authority than 1,000 mercenaries fighting for ego. Let me paint you a picture from 2 Kings chapter 6. The prophet Elisha wakes up one morning and his servant is having a panic attack. Why? Because they're completely surrounded. The Syrian army has rolled up on them with horses, chariots, and enough soldiers to make the Romans jealous. The servant looks at Elisha like, "Prophet, we're about to die. What's the plan?" But Elisha's making breakfast, calm as a summer morning, because he sees something his servant doesn't see. He prays a simple prayer, "Lord, open his eyes." And suddenly, the servant sees the truth. The hills are full of horses and chariots of fire, heaven's army. And they weren't just watching, they were positioned for war. The Syrian army thought they had numbers. God had rank. If you're feeling this deep in your spirit right now, type unbreakable in the comments. Let the enemy know you're not just surviving, you're thriving under divine protection. Here's what they never told you about spiritual warfare. The enemy always overestimates the power of crowds and underestimates the power of calling. They think volume equals victory. They believe noise equals authority. But God's been teaching the same lesson for thousands of years. One person standing in their divine assignment is more dangerous than an army standing in rebellion. You remember David facing Goliath? The Philistines had size. David had rank. You remember Gideon's 300 against the Midianites? The enemy had numbers. Gideon had strategy from the Most High. You remember Jesus in the wilderness? Satan had temptations. Jesus had the Word. The pattern is always the same. They come with externals. You come with eternals. But let's get real about what you went through. They didn't just disagree with you, they dismantled you. They didn't just oppose your ideas, they attacked your identity. They took every vulnerable moment you'd shared, every weakness you'd confessed, every fear you'd whispered, and they weaponized it. They turned your honesty into ammunition and your trust into their target practice. They held secret meetings about your future. They made group decisions about your destiny. They voted on your value like you were some corporate stock they could buy and sell. And the most painful part, some of these people used to call you family. Some of them used to call you friend. But here's where the plot twist happens, chosen one. While they were busy playing God with your life, the real God was busy playing chess with theirs. Every move they made in the shadows, he countered in the light. Every trap they set, he turned into a detour that led you to your breakthrough. Every door they slammed, he opened 3 more down the hallway. You see, they made one critical error in their calculations. They assumed you were fighting alone. They thought when you walked away from their toxic circles, when you stopped explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, when you chose silence over their chaos, they thought that was surrender. That wasn't surrender. That was strategy. Because while they were exhausting themselves with their elaborate schemes, you were being refined in the secret place. While they were burning calories on conspiracy theories, you were burning through every lie you'd ever believed about yourself. While they were practicing witchcraft, you were practicing warfare. And the most beautiful part? You didn't even know you were winning. You thought you were just surviving. You thought you were just enduring. You thought you were just holding on by a thread. But heaven was keeping score, and every day you chose forgiveness over revenge. Every morning you chose faith over fear. Every moment you chose to trust God's timing over your own understanding. You were racking up victories in realms they couldn't even see. The gang of witches thought they were dealing with regular people. They thought they could manipulate you like they manipulated everyone else. They thought they could break you like they'd broken others. But what they didn't realize is that chosen ones aren't made in factories. We're forged in fires. We're not mass-produced. We're custom-designed for the storms that would destroy ordinary souls. And now, as we stand here today, as you're listening to this message, as the truth is finally cutting through the fog of their deception, can you feel it? That shift in the atmosphere, that trembling in the spirit realm, that's not your anxiety, that's their fear. Because they've finally realized what they're really dealing with. They thought they were hunting prey, but they just woke up a predator, and what comes next will show them the difference between playing with shadows and standing against the light. Now, let me tell you about the weapon they never saw coming, the one that shattered their entire operation without you lifting a single finger. They thought silence meant weakness. but silence was the weapon the universe put in your hands. You see, dear chosen one, while they were building their little armies of gossip and manipulation, while they were crafting their spells of slander and weaving their webs of deceit, you did something that absolutely terrified them. You went quiet. And in that silence, you became the most dangerous person they'd ever encountered. Think about it. When was the last time someone tried to pick a fight with you, and instead of taking the bait, you just walked away? Remember how confused they looked? How they kept poking, kept pushing, kept trying to get a reaction? That wasn't persistence, warrior. That was panic. Because here's what the devil's disciples don't understand about the psychology of power. Drama is their oxygen. Chaos is their currency. And when you refuse to give them either, they suffocate in their own poison. Every ignored insult unraveled their spell. Every time you walked away, their grip loosened. Every moment you chose peace over proving your point, you were literally dismantling their entire infrastructure of control. You think I'm being dramatic? Let me paint you a picture that'll make your spirit leap. Remember Pharaoh's magicians when Moses threw down his staff? They could copy the trick, turn their staffs into serpents too, but Moses' serpent swallowed theirs whole. That's what your silence did to their schemes. It didn't just defeat them, it consumed them. See, witchcraft, and yes, I'm calling their manipulation exactly what it is. Witchcraft operates on one principle: getting you to react from your flesh instead of responding from your spirit. The moment you start defending yourself with their weapons, you're playing their game. But silence? Silence plays by heaven's rules. And heaven's rules are undefeated. Here's where it gets beautiful and terrifying for them. Every time they threw an accusation at you and got nothing back, something supernatural happened. Their own words started echoing in their own heads. Their own lies started haunting their own sleep. Their own poison started burning their own throats. You didn't curse them. Your silence cursed them. But let me go deeper. Because some of you are sitting there thinking, but I wanted to fight back. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted them to know the truth. Dear heart, that's exactly what they were counting on. They needed your reaction to validate their narrative. They needed your anger to justify their attacks. They needed your defense to make their accusations seem credible. Without your participation in their drama, their entire story fell apart. And that's when the real terror set in for them. Because a person who can stay silent in the face of injustice isn't just strong, they're anointed. They're operating from a realm these earthly manipulators can't touch, can't understand, and certainly can't compete with. Do you know what Moses told the Israelites when they were trapped between Pharaoh's army and the Red Sea, when death was charging from behind and impossibility was staring them in the face? He didn't say, "Get ready to fight." He didn't say, "Start making battle plans." He said, "Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." Stand still. Be silent. Watch God work. And what happened? The very sea that looked like their grave became their gateway to freedom. The very obstacle that seemed insurmountable became their enemy's tomb. Your silence did the same thing, chosen one. The very situations they meant to bury you in became the soil for your greatest breakthrough. But here's the part that's going to shake you to your core. Ready? They wanted drama, but got indifference, and indifference is deadlier than any sword. A sword can wound, but indifference erases. When you stopped caring about their opinion, when you stopped trying to convince them of your worth, when you stopped feeding their need for chaos with your emotional responses, you didn't just defeat them, you made them irrelevant. And irrelevance is the one thing their ego couldn't survive. Think about the psychology of a narcissist, a manipulator, a spiritual witch. They need to matter. They need to be the center of the storm. They need to feel like they have power over your emotions, your decisions, your peace. But the moment you refuse to give them that power, the moment you choose silence over struggle, something inside them breaks, because your silence forces them to face the one person they've been running from their entire life, themselves. Without your reaction to distract them, without your pain to feed on, without your chaos to hide behind, they're left alone with their own emptiness. And that emptiness starts screaming louder than they ever did. That's why they kept coming back, kept poking, kept trying to reignite the drama. Not because they hated you, because they were addicted to the version of themselves they became when they were destroying you. And your silence cut off their supply. Now here's the revelation that's going to change everything for you. Your silence wasn't just a strategy. It was a shield. Every word you didn't say created a barrier they couldn't penetrate. Every argument you didn't engage built a wall they couldn't climb. Every reaction you didn't give strengthened a fortress they couldn't breach. You became untouchable not because you fought harder, but because you stopped fighting altogether. And in that stopping, in that holy silence, heaven stepped in and fought for you. But the weapon of silence does something even more powerful than protection. It reveals truth. When you stop making noise, when you stop defending, when you stop explaining, the only sound left is the echo of their own lies. And lies, when they echo long enough, start sounding hollow even to the liar. That's when their own allies started backing away. That's when their own supporters started asking questions. That's when their own consciences started convicting them. Your silence didn't just defeat their attacks, it turned their own weapons against them. If this is striking your spirit right now, if you're recognizing the power of the silence you thought was weakness, comment "silent strength" right now. That's not just a comment, that's your declaration that you understand the weapon you've been carrying all along. Because what's coming next is going to blow your mind. If silence was your shield, then what we're about to uncover next is how you became the sword itself. How your very existence became the weapon that not only defended you, but dismantled their entire kingdom of darkness. Are you ready to discover why your rank in heaven terrified their gang on earth? You know what they never tell you about spiritual warfare? They never tell you that the devil's favorite trick isn't sending one demon, it's sending a committee. A whole board of directors from hell, all dressed up in familiar faces, all carrying clipboards of your past mistakes, all voting unanimously that you don't belong at the table. But here's what I need you to understand, chosen one. Here's what 30 years of walking with the Most High has taught me about the mathematics of heaven versus the arithmetic of hell. Numbers don't define authority. Rank does. Listen to me carefully. When Pharaoh's magicians threw down their staffs and they became serpents, Moses didn't panic because he was outnumbered. He knew something they didn't know. He knew that one staff backed by the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would swallow every counterfeit snake in that throne room, not because his staff was bigger, not because his staff was louder, but because his staff carried rank. You see, they came at you like a deck of cards, 52 reasons why you should quit, 52 voices telling you you're not enough, 52 testimonies against your character. The deck looked thick, the pile looked intimidating. But here's what they forgot. A deck of cards looks thick, but the ace ends the game. And baby, you weren't just holding an ace. You were the ace that heaven had been keeping in reserve for such a time as this. Do you remember when young David walked into that valley where grown men were trembling? Do you remember what the army of Israel saw when they looked at Goliath? They saw 9 feet and 6 inches of pure intimidation. They saw bronze armor weighing 125 pounds. They saw a spear shaft thick as a weaver's beam, with an iron point weighing 15 pounds. They counted the measurements and calculated their odds. But David didn't see measurements. David saw disrespect. David didn't count armor. David counted covenant. Because when you carry the rank of the Most High, you don't measure the giant, You measure the gap between the giant's blasphemy and God's glory. You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, David declared, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. One smooth stone, one sling, one shepherd boy who understood that rank trumps numbers every single time. And right now, I need you to stop counting how many people turned against you. Stop calculating how many lies they spread, how many doors they tried to close, how many nights they kept you awake with their whispers and schemes. Stop doing the devil's mathematics, because while you were counting opposition, heaven was counting your tears. While you were measuring their coalition, God was measuring your heart. While you were calculating their strength, the Almighty was calibrating his response. You want to know why they screamed in fear when they realized what they were really dealing with? Because somewhere in the middle of their witch hunt, it dawned on them that they weren't fighting a person, they were fighting a ranking system they couldn't access, couldn't buy, couldn't vote out of office. They thought if they could just gather enough voices, build enough consensus, create enough drama, they could drown out the still small voice that kept whispering in your ear, "Touch not my anointed, and do my prophets no harm." But here's what broke their little spell. Here's what shattered their confidence and sent them running for cover. The moment you stopped trying to defend yourself to people who were never going to listen anyway, the moment you stopped explaining your heart to folk who had already made up their minds, the moment you stopped playing their numbers game and started walking in your rank. Because see, they needed you to fight them on their level. They needed you to get down in the mud and wrestle with pigs. They needed you to start throwing stones back, start gossiping back, start plotting back. Because as long as you were playing their game, they had a chance. But the second you said, "Be still and know that I am God," everything shifted. The second you said, "The battle is not mine, it's the Lord's," the mathematics changed. The second you said, "If God be for me, who can be against me?" their calculator broke. You are not the prey, warrior. You never were. You are the general that heaven stationed in that valley to show principalities and powers that one person walking in divine rank can dismantle 1,000 operating in human rank. You are the walking, breathing reminder that God doesn't need committees to move mountains. He doesn't need focus groups to part seas. He doesn't need board meetings to raise the dead. One Moses versus Pharaoh's entire empire. One Elijah versus 450 prophets of Baal. One Esther versus a conspiracy that reached to the king's right hand. One Daniel versus a den full of lions with political teeth. The pattern is clear. Heaven's track record is flawless. When God promotes, hell can only watch. And right now, while they're still trying to figure out how one person dismantled everything they built with their collective effort, I need you to understand something that's going to set you free forever. This was never about the battle. This was about your endurance. This was never about who could swing harder. This was about who could stand longer. This was never about who had more people. This was about who had more staying power. Because here's what I'm going to reveal to you in just a moment, something that's going to blow your mind about why your silence became the most devastating weapon in heaven's arsenal. But first, I need you to get this deep in your spirit. You didn't survive their attack by accident. You didn't outlast their scheme by luck. You didn't stand while they fell because you're tougher. You stood because heaven ranks you differently than earth counts you. So the question isn't how many stood against you. The question is, do you finally understand what rank you carry? You know what they thought would break you? Time. They believed if they could just stretch out your suffering long enough, you'd eventually crack. They studied you like vultures circling wounded prey, watching for that moment when your spirit would finally surrender. But here's what those spiritual assassins never understood about the chosen ones. We're not built like everyone else. We're forged in a furnace they can't even comprehend. Listen to me, beloved. You've been through hell, haven't you? I'm talking to the grandmother who watched her own children turn against her when she wouldn't enable their dysfunction anymore. I'm speaking to the grandfather who lost everything in that business partnership with people he trusted for decades. I see you, dear one, who spent sleepless nights wondering if the betrayal would ever stop echoing in your chest. They came for you with a strategy as old as Satan himself: slow erosion. Not one devastating blow, but 1,000 paper cuts designed to bleed you dry over years. The financial hits that came right when you thought you were getting ahead. The family gatherings where your own blood looked through you like you were invisible. The phone calls that stopped coming. The invitations that dried up. The friends who became strangers overnight. They thought they were breaking you down piece by piece, but what they were actually doing was stripping away everything that wasn't eternal in you. Every betrayal was God's chisel, carving away the parts of you that still believed human approval mattered more than divine purpose. You remember those nights, don't you? When sleep felt like a luxury you couldn't afford, because your mind was racing with questions. How could they do this to me, after everything I've done for them, after all the years I invested, all the love I poured out, all the sacrifices I made? The darkness whispered that maybe you deserved it. Maybe you were the problem. Maybe you should just disappear and stop bothering everyone. But here's the truth that kept you breathing when you wanted to quit. You were never fighting for your life. You were fighting for your legacy. You were standing in the gap for every person in your bloodline who would come after you. You were the firewall between generational curses and generational blessing. The Bible tells us about a man named Job. This brother lost everything: his wealth, his children, his health, even his wife's support. His so-called friends showed up just to tell him it was all his fault. For months, he sat in ashes, scraping his wounds with broken pottery, wondering why God had allowed such devastation. But Job 42:10 tells us something that'll shake your spirit. After Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. Did you catch that? After he prayed for the very people who tormented him. After he chose blessing over bitterness. After he decided that his endurance would be his testimony, not his tragedy. That's you, warrior. You've been living Job's story in real time. Every sleepless night was building your character. Every betrayal was increasing your capacity for compassion. Every financial blow was teaching you that your security doesn't come from bank accounts. It comes from the one who owns every cattle on 1,000 hills. But here's where it gets supernatural. While they were plotting your destruction, your endurance was becoming their judgment. While they were celebrating what they thought was your defeat, your perseverance was writing their obituary. Because here's what the enemy never calculates when you outlast darkness. You don't just survive it, you transform it. Psychology calls it post-traumatic growth. The Bible calls it beauty for ashes. Whatever you want to call it, the result is the same: you become indestructible. Not because you're hard, but because you're surrendered. Not because you're angry, but because you're aligned. Not because you're bitter, but because you're better. They thought they were watching you break. What they were actually witnessing was your metamorphosis. Like a caterpillar in a cocoon, you had to dissolve completely before you could become what you were always meant to be. And now you're flying at altitudes they can't even breathe at. Your endurance wasn't passive. It was the most active form of warfare you could engage in. Every day you chose to get up, instead of giving up, was a sword thrust into their plans. Every moment you chose hope over hatred was a nail in the coffin of their conspiracy. Every time you blessed instead of cursed was you literally outlasting the darkness they tried to drown you in. You want to know why they're screaming in fear now? Because they finally understand what they were up against. They thought they were fighting flesh and blood. They were actually wrestling with someone heaven had already marked as untouchable. They thought your silence meant surrender. Your silence was the sound of God sharpening his sword. Like a candle in the wind, your flame bent but never broke. And now that same flame that they tried to extinguish is setting their whole house of lies on fire. Your endurance didn't just outlast their attack, it became the very weapon that destroyed everything they built against you. The most terrifying realization for your enemies isn't that you survived, it's that you thrived. It's that their worst efforts only made you stronger. It's that the pit they dug for you became the foundation for your palace. It's that the stones they threw at you became the cornerstones of your testimony. This is why endurance is the chosen one's secret weapon, because anybody can fight when they're winning, anybody can praise when life is easy. But only the truly chosen can worship in the wilderness, smile through the storm, and love through the betrayal. Your very existence is now a living sermon about the power of divine endurance. Your life has become a cautionary tale for anyone who thinks they can come against someone God has set apart. You're not just a survivor, you're a walking billboard that advertises what happens when someone tries to break what heaven has already made unbreakable. So what happens when the one they thought would crumble becomes the cornerstone they can't remove? You know what's been eating at them all these years. It's not your success, it's not your peace, it's not even your breakthrough. What's destroying them from the inside out is something far more terrifying. They're finally seeing themselves clearly. And beloved, when people have been living behind masks for decades, when they've built their entire identity on lies and manipulation, the mirror becomes their worst nightmare. Every single curse they whispered over your name, every hex, every evil intention, every midnight prayer against your destiny, it's all coming back like a boomerang with their fingerprints still on it. You didn't have to fight back. You didn't have to cast spells or burn candles or gather your own little army of revenge. All you had to do was stand in truth, and truth became the mirror that shattered their illusion. Listen to me carefully, chosen one. When you throw mud at a sheet of glass, what happens? The mud doesn't stick to the glass, it splashes right back on the thrower. That's exactly what's been happening in the spiritual realm. Every lie they told about you is now echoing in their own reputation. Every door they tried to close for you is now slamming shut in their face. Every relationship they poisoned against you is now turning toxic in their own lives. You see, projection is a spiritual law, as real as gravity. What you send out into the universe must return to sender. And when you send out poison wrapped in fake prayers, when you launch attacks disguised as concern, when you spread darkness while claiming to walk in light, that energy doesn't just disappear, it circles back with compound interest. They called you bitter while their own hearts were rotting with envy. They labeled you as the problem while they were the ones spreading chaos everywhere they went. They painted you as unstable while their own lives were built on foundations of sand. But here's the devastating truth they're now discovering. You can't assassinate someone's character without revealing your own. Do you remember the story of Haman in the book of Esther? This man was so consumed with hatred for one Jewish man named Mordecai that he built gallows 75 feet high, that's a 7-story building, beloved, specifically designed to hang his enemy. He was so confident, so arrogant, so certain that his scheme would work. He even threw a party to celebrate Mordecai's anticipated death. But here's what Haman didn't understand about the mirror of judgment. Esther 7:10 tells us the end of his story. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. The very trap he built for his enemy became his own tomb. The celebration he planned for someone else's destruction became his own funeral. That's exactly what's happening to every single person who came against you with malicious intent. The pit they dug for you, they're falling into it head first. The reputation they tried to destroy, it's their own name being dragged through the mud now. The isolation they orchestrated for you, they're now sitting in it, wondering why everybody's backing away from their toxic energy. But here's where this gets really deep, really spiritual, really profound. You didn't fight them. You couldn't fight them even if you wanted to, because they weren't really fighting you. They were fighting their own reflection in you. Every time they looked at you, they saw everything they could have been but chose not to be. Your integrity exposed their corruption. Your peace highlighted their chaos. Your genuine spirit revealed their fake personas. When someone lives in darkness long enough, light becomes painful to their eyes. When someone feeds on drama and dysfunction, your stability becomes an offense to their lifestyle. When someone's identity is built on being the victim, your victory becomes a threat to their narrative. You became the mirror they couldn't avoid, and instead of changing what they saw, they tried to break the mirror. But mirrors protected by God don't break, beloved. They multiply, and now they're surrounded by reflections of their own ugly behavior, their own toxic patterns, their own spiritual bankruptcy. Everywhere they turn, they see the consequences of their choices staring back at them. Think about this for a moment. How many times did they accuse you of exactly what they were doing? They called you manipulative while they were the ones pulling strings behind the scenes. They said you were jealous while their own envy was eating them alive. They claimed you were causing division while they were the ones spreading poison in every conversation. That's not coincidence, chosen one. That's projection. And projection is just confession disguised as accusation. Every time they pointed a finger at you, they were really describing themselves. Every lie they told about your character was actually an autobiography of their own heart. They couldn't see your flaws because they were too busy projecting their own. And now, now the universe is playing back every single recording. Every whispered conversation where they plotted against you is now echoing in their own ears. Every secret meeting where they conspired to bring you down is now haunting their memories. Every fake smile they gave you while sharpening knives behind your back is now a reminder of their own duplicity. The judgment isn't coming from you. You're not seeking revenge. You're not even thinking about them most days. The judgment is coming from the mirror of their own conscience, and it's relentless. It wakes them up at night. It follows them into their relationships. It whispers in their moments of supposed victory, reminding them of how they got there. You want to know why they can't enjoy their success? Because they know how they achieved it. They know whose back they stepped on. They know whose dreams they crushed. They know whose reputation they assassinated, and that knowledge is poisoning every blessing they try to claim. This is why Scripture says, "Be sure your sin will find you out." Numbers 32-23. Not might find you out, will find you out. The mirror of judgment is inescapable for those who choose to live in deception, and the longer they avoid looking at themselves honestly, the more distorted and painful that reflection becomes. But here's what I need you to understand about your role in all of this. You were never their enemy. You were their opportunity. God placed you in their path not to be their victim, but to be their wake-up call. Your presence was meant to reveal what was already there, hiding in the shadows of their heart. The light you carried was supposed to help them see their need for healing, for change, for genuine transformation. Instead, they chose to curse the light rather than let it illuminate their darkness. They chose to attack the messenger rather than receive the message. They chose to break the mirror rather than face what it revealed. And now they're living with the consequences of that choice. So, what happens next? How does this story end for those who thought they could destroy God's chosen without consequences? The same way it ended for Haman, for Pharaoh, for every enemy of God's people throughout history. The gallows they built becomes their final destination. The trap they set becomes their prison. The curse they sent out becomes their own inheritance. But what about you, beloved? What's your part in this cosmic justice? Here's the beautiful, powerful, liberating truth that's about to change everything you thought you knew about spiritual warfare. Now we're getting to the heart of why they came for you with such vengeance, chosen one. This wasn't just about silencing your voice. This was about stopping something far more dangerous to their kingdom of darkness, generational healing. Listen carefully. Every family tree has poisoned branches. Every bloodline carries wounds that get passed down like cursed heirlooms. Your grandmother's pain became your mother's bitterness. Your father's rejection became your brother's rage. Generation after generation, the same patterns, the same cycles, the same spiritual chains, dragging families into the same pits of dysfunction, addiction, poverty, and despair. But then, you came along. They saw something in your DNA that terrified them. They recognized that you weren't just another victim in the assembly line of generational trauma. You were the anomaly, the glitch in their matrix, the one who would refuse to pass the poison to the next generation. Think about it. Why did the attacks intensify when you started healing? Why did family members turn against you when you set boundaries? Why did old friends become enemies when you stopped playing their toxic games? Because they knew. Deep in their spirits, they knew you were the one who would break the chain. You became the link that snapped the chain. Joseph understood this warfare. Sold into slavery by his own brothers, falsely accused, thrown into prison, but Genesis 50-20 tells us his revelation. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. You see, dear warrior, every attack against you was actually an attack against your seed. They weren't just trying to destroy you, they were trying to destroy the generations that would come through you. The children who would never know addiction because you broke that cycle. The grandchildren who would never know poverty because you shifted the family's relationship with abundance. The great-grandchildren who would never know the sting of abandonment because you learned to choose love over fear. But here's where it gets supernatural. The very weapons they used against you became the tools of your transformation. Every betrayal taught you discernment. Every rejection taught you self-worth. Every attack made you stronger, wiser, more aligned with heaven's frequency. They thought you'd be another poisoned branch hanging from the same diseased tree, but you became the new seed. You didn't just survive your family's dysfunction, you alchemized it into wisdom. You didn't just escape the patterns, you rewrote the code. You didn't just heal yourself, you became a portal of healing for every generation that will follow your bloodline. And that's what's driving them absolutely insane right now. They invested years, maybe decades, trying to keep you trapped in the same cycles that destroyed your ancestors. They whispered the same lies. You'll never amount to anything. You're just like your father. This family is cursed. Nothing good ever happens to people like us. But you proved them wrong by becoming living proof that bloodline curses expire when they meet someone who refuses to honor them. Do you understand the magnitude of what you've accomplished? You didn't just change your life. You changed your family's destiny. Every prayer you prayed in secret, every time you chose forgiveness over revenge, every boundary you set, every toxic relationship you walked away from, all of it was surgery on the family tree. The generational curse that held your lineage captive for decades, maybe centuries, ended the day you refused to repeat the patterns. That's why they're screaming in fear. That's why the spiritual attacks were so vicious. That's why even your own family turned against you when you started rising. Because your healing exposed their sickness. Your freedom highlighted their chains. Your breakthrough became their worst nightmare. You became the ancestor your descendants will thank God for. The one who said, "The cycle stops here. The addiction stops here. The poverty mindset stops here. The victim mentality stops here. The generational trauma stops here." And just like Joseph, what was meant for your destruction became the salvation of many. Your pain became your purpose. Your wounds became your wisdom. Your scars became your credentials to heal others, walking the same bloody path. But here's the part that will make your enemies lose sleep tonight. You're not done. Breaking your own bloodline curse was just the beginning. Now you carry the authority to help others break theirs. Now you move with the power to dismantle generational strongholds wherever you go. Now your very presence becomes a threat to every family curse, every ancestral chain, every generational pattern that has held God's people in bondage. You've become more than a survivor, chosen one. You've become a generational curse breaker, and that anointing on your life is about to reach depths they never anticipated. The question is no longer whether you'll break free. You already have. The question now is, how many other bloodlines will be liberated because you had the courage to be the first in your family to choose healing over heritage, purpose over patterns, destiny over dysfunction? But there's something even more powerful happening in your life right now, something that's creating an impenetrable shield around everything you've built, and it's time you understood the weapon that's been protecting you all along. You know what they never tell you about spiritual warfare? They never tell you that your greatest protection isn't what you do, it's what you refuse to do. They never tell you that sometimes the most powerful weapon in heaven's arsenal is a simple two-letter word: number. Dear chosen one, while they were casting spells and weaving webs of destruction around your life, something extraordinary was happening. You weren't just defending yourself, you were incinerating their attacks before they could even land. Every curse they hurled at you turned to ash mid-air. Every trap they set became their own prison. Every arrow they shot boomeranged back with interest. But how? How does one person destroy an entire network of darkness without throwing a single punch? The answer is alignment. Pure, uncompromising, radical alignment with the Most High God. Listen to me carefully. When Jesus walked into that wilderness 40 days and 40 nights, Satan didn't come with demons and pitchforks. He came with logic. He came with opportunity. He came with what looked like blessing. Turn these stones to bread. You're hungry, aren't you? Jump off this temple, God will catch you, won't he? Bow down to me, I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world. But Jesus had something that made him untouchable. Not superhuman strength, not mystical powers. He had a lion and meant. 3 times the enemy attacked. 3 times Jesus responded with the same weapon. It is written. That's it. That's the firewall. Your ancestors didn't understand this. They fought fire with fire. They met manipulation with manipulation. They answered curse with curse. Generation after generation, your bloodline tried to win wars with the enemy's weapons, and generation after generation, they lost. But you broke the cycle. When they gossiped about you, you didn't gossip back. When they betrayed you, you didn't seek revenge. When they isolated you, you didn't try to force your way back in. When they spread lies, you didn't waste your breath on truth that would fall on deaf ears. You did something that confused hell itself. You said yes to God's process, even when it looked like defeat, and that yes became a firewall that no weapon of darkness could penetrate. Think about it. How many times did they expect you to react? How many times did they bait you into arguments, trying to drag you down to their level? How many times did they offer you shortcuts, compromises, ways to make peace that required you to shrink yourself back down to their comfort zone? But every time something inside you whispered, this isn't the way. Something inside you knew that God's path, even when it's painful, is always better than man's shortcut. That's the firewall of alignment. When your yes belongs to God alone, the enemy's no has no power over you. I need you to understand something that will change how you see every attack that's ever come against you. Those people weren't just jealous of your success, They weren't just envious of your gifts. They were terrified of your alignment. Because aligned people are unpredictable. Aligned people can't be bought. Aligned people can't be manipulated. Aligned people operate by heaven's laws, not earth's politics. And heaven's laws make earth's schemes look like child's play. Remember when they tried to make you choose between your calling and their approval? Remember when they dangled opportunities in front of you that would have required you to compromise your values? Remember when they offered you a seat at their table, knowing full well it was a trap? You could have said yes. You could have taken the easy road. You could have joined their circus. But something deeper than desire, stronger than desperation, held you back. That was God's firewall working through your obedience. Every time you chose the narrow path over the wide gate, you weren't just making a personal decision. You were setting off spiritual explosions in the realm of darkness. Every time you chose God's timing over man's pressure, you were sending shockwaves through hell's strategy room. They couldn't understand it. How does someone walk away from good opportunities? How does someone choose isolation over inclusion? How does someone choose the long way when the shortcut is right there? Because you knew something they didn't. You knew that anything built on compromise eventually crumbles. You knew that any victory that requires you to betray yourself isn't a victory at all. You knew that God's detours are always shortcuts to his destination. Your alignment became their confusion. Your obedience became their chaos. Your faithfulness became their downfall. And here's the part that will blow your mind. While you were saying no to their schemes, God was saying yes to your breakthrough. While you were refusing their poison, heaven was preparing your promotion. While you were walking away from their circus, angels were clearing the path to your palace. This is what the enemy never calculated. This is what they never saw coming. They thought alignment meant weakness. They thought obedience meant passivity. They thought your yes to God meant no to power. They were wrong. Dead wrong. Your alignment with God didn't make you weak. It made you nuclear. Every scheme they launched hit an invisible wall and exploded in their faces. Every curse they sent ricocheted back to sender. Every trap they set became their own prison cell. Because when you're aligned with the creator of the universe, you don't fight battles, you watch enemies defeat themselves. The world witnessed something they'd never seen before. Witchcraft collapsing against a simple yes to God. Manipulation crumbling against unshakable obedience. Entire networks of darkness dissolving because one person refused to compromise their alignment. They screamed. They raged. They threw everything they had at the firewall of your faith, and it stood, unmoved, unshaken, unbreakable. But here's what I need you to understand as we move forward. Your firewall isn't just protection, it's preparation. God didn't just save you from something, he saved you for something. Every attack you survived, every scheme you outlasted, every trap you avoided, it was all training for the authority you're about to step into. Because the question isn't just, why did you survive their assault? The question is, what is God preparing you to assault next? You know what they're whispering about you now. They're not calling you names anymore. They're not spreading lies. They're not even looking you in the eye. You want to know why? Because somewhere between their last attack and your last breath of freedom, something shifted in the spiritual realm that they can feel but can't explain. You were the prey that became the predator, but not the kind of predator they expected. Not the kind that hunts and devours. No, you became something far more terrifying to the forces of darkness. You became untouchable. You became the living, breathing proof that their witchcraft has an expiration date. And now, dear chosen one, your very existence is a caution sign written in the blood of the Lamb. Do not touch this one. Listen to me carefully. When David walked into that valley to face Goliath, the Philistines weren't just watching a boy with a slingshot. They were witnessing the birth of a legend. They were seeing someone transition from target to terror. And that's exactly what happened to you when you refused to stay down. The Bible tells us in Psalm 91, verses 7 and 8, 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. You will only observe with your eyes and see the punishment of the wicked. Do you hear that? You didn't have to lift a finger against them. You just had to stand there and watch as everything they built against you collapsed under the weight of divine justice. They dug a pit for you, but fell into it themselves. Remember when they gathered in their little circles, planning your downfall? Remember when they whispered your name like a curse word? Remember when they thought they had you cornered, isolated, finished? They were digging. Oh, they were digging deep. But here's what they didn't know about the laws of spiritual warfare. Every trap set for the righteous becomes a tomb for the wicked. You see, when Haman built those gallows for Mordecai, he thought he was constructing an execution, but God was orchestrating a revelation. The very rope meant for the innocent became the noose for the guilty. And that's exactly what happened in your situation. Every lie they told about you bounced back and strangled their credibility. Every scheme they hatched cracked their own foundation. Every curse they sent your way returned to sender with compound interest. But here's the part that's going to blow your mind. You didn't even have to fight back. You know why? Because your existence became your revenge. Think about this for a moment. How many nights did you lie awake wondering if you should expose them? How many times did you draft that text message, that social media post, that email that would have destroyed their reputation? How many opportunities did you have to drag their names through the mud? But something inside you said, "Number, let God handle this." And now look at what your obedience produced. You're not just standing, you're glowing. You're not just surviving, you're thriving. You're not just healing, you're helping others heal. While they're still trying to figure out why their lives are falling apart, you're walking in a dimension of blessing they can't even comprehend. Your silence became your sword. Your endurance became your victory. Your faith became their nightmare. And now, every time someone mentions your name in their presence, they flinch. Not because they hate you, because they fear you. They fear what you represent. They fear the God you serve. They fear the protection you carry. They fear the anointing that rests on your life like an invisible shield. You've become what every witch, every warlock, every agent of darkness fears the most. A child of God who can't be touched, can't be broken, can't be bought, and can't be silenced. Do you understand what this means? You're no longer walking around with a target on your back. You're walking around with a crown on your head and a warning label on your spirit that reads, "Property of the Most High God." Trespassers will be prosecuted to the full extent of divine law. They tried to make you their victim, but God made you their cautionary tale. And here's the beautiful irony they created, the very monster they now have to live in fear of. Not a monster of revenge or bitterness, but a monster of righteousness, a monster of unshakable faith, a monster of divine favor that they can never again manipulate or control. You want to know how powerful you've become? You don't even have to mention their names for them to feel your presence. You don't have to be in the same room for them to remember what they did. You don't have to say a word for them to hear the sound of their own judgment echoing in their ears. Your breakthrough became their breakdown. Your elevation became their education. Your restoration became their warning. Chosen one, before we close this sacred moment together, let me remind you of the truth that will carry you through every storm ahead. You are not a victim of circumstance. You are a victor by divine design. When they gathered against you, they unknowingly gathered against heaven itself. When they tried to break you, they discovered you were forged in fires they could never understand. Remember this: your silence was your strength. Your endurance was your weapon. Your faith was their defeat. And your existence, your very breath, is proof that what God has protected No force in hell can destroy. You are not walking this journey alone. The same God who turned their weapons against them is still working miracles in your life today. The same divine protection that shielded you then is covering you now. And this community, this family of faith gathered in this digital sanctuary, we see you, we believe in you, and we're praying with you every step of the way. I want you to take a moment and ask yourself this question. Now that you know who you really are, now that you understand the power you carry, what will you do with this revelation? Let me pray over you right now. Heavenly Father, I place my hand on the shoulder of every chosen one watching this message. Lord, you see the scars they carry, the battles they've fought in silence, the tears they've cried when no one was watching. But you also see their strength, their resilience, their unshakable faith that refuse to bow to darkness. Father, I pray you continue to open doors that no man can shut. Bless them with opportunities that exceed their wildest dreams. Surround them with people who recognize their value, their calling, their divine purpose. Let every step they take be ordered by you. Every word they speak carry your authority, and every breath they breathe be a testimony of your goodness. Protect them from every scheme of the enemy. Let no weapon formed against them prosper. And Lord, use their story, their victory, their very existence to set others free who are still trapped in battles they don't understand. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. Now I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment below and tell us what resonated most with your spirit today. Share your breakthrough moment, your revelation, or simply write, "I am chosen," so this community can celebrate with you and pray over your journey. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. Thank you for opening your heart to receive what heaven wanted to pour into your spirit today. You are loved. You are chosen. You are unstoppable. Until next time, keep walking in your authority, warrior of light.